Here's the thing, I've held on to every single PC case I've ever reviewed. I have an entire storage unit dedicated to enclosures, and the latest addition to my lineup is the 2000D Airflow by Corsair. Now, I've got to say, this is a pretty slick Mini-ITX tower that Corsair's put together. It's got some things going for it that I like, however, I'll be real with you. Once we wrap up the review today, it's heading right back where it came from, and for that, we could point the finger squarely at Newegg. Hey guys, CJ with Elevated Systems, and in recent years we've seen the Corsair 2000D Airflow make quite the mark in the world of PC cases. So when this all-new Corsair 2000D caught my eye on Newegg, I was naturally intrigued. This Mini-ITX tower is reminiscent of stellar cases like the NZXT H1 and the Height Revolt 3, but with a twist. It's designed to house gigantic graphics cards and a beastly 360mm AIO, and comes pre-equipped with a trio of AF120 slim fans. All of this wrapped up in a mesh-laden package and priced at a cool $140. Sounded like quite the bargain, so naturally I ordered one, but was let down immediately upon unboxing. Now, don't get me wrong, the case itself is pretty impressive, as we'll soon see. Corsair has definitely done their homework, but the initial letdown came courtesy of Newegg. Their description and images promised fans included, but when I opened the package, the case was a fanless void. Apparently, the 2000D Airflow doesn't come with any fans unless you cough up an extra $50 for the RGB variant, which does include 3 Corsair AF120 RGB slim fans. This hiccup is squarely on Newegg and doesn't really detract from what Corsair has achieved with this case. However, it does throw a wrench in the overall value proposition. Spending $140 on the case and then having to shell out extra for fans could be a deal breaker for some, especially those working with a tight PC build budget. That being said, even with the deceptive Newegg product description, I'm not backing out. We're still going to drive on with our typical case review. I'll be covering the specs and features, checking out what fits and what doesn't, running some thermal tests, and sharing my build notes along with the pros and cons. Finally, I'll wrap it all up by sharing my take on the overall value of the Corsair 2000D Airflow Mini-ITX case. So let's start with the specs and features. The 2000D measures 271mm deep, 200mm wide, and 456mm tall. The case is compatible with Mini-ITX motherboards and can officially accommodate CPU coolers up to 90mm tall, though unofficially it may hold something a bit larger. It supports graphics cards up to 365mm long, but is limited to 3 slot widths, and SFX power supplies up to 130mm long. Although the case comes without fans, it can support up to 3 120mm fans in the front, 3 120mm or 2 140mm on the right side, and 2 120mm in the rear if you have a particularly slim graphics card. Furthermore, this case can accommodate a 360mm radiator or AIO on the right side. There's a removable drive tray for one 2.5-inch SSD with 2 mounting locations and a second SSD mounting location on the top of the case. The front I/O includes an LED power button, 2 5GB Type A ports, a 10GB Type C port, a combo headphone mic jack, and a reset switch. The left and right mesh panels are attached with tabs and ball studs and secured with thumb screws. The front panel, attached with ball studs and clips, pulls off for easy access, while the top cover is magnetically attached for quick and simple access to the PSU cable and switch. Finally, a magnetically attached mesh filter is situated at the rear of the case, covering the graphics card intake. A removable plastic cover at the bottom allows access to the motherboard and graphics card's I/O. Alright guys, with the case taken apart, it's time to dive deep into the craftsmanship that's gone into it. And we'll start with the panels. Our left, right, front, and top panels have been shaped out of a hybrid of molded plastic and stamped steel, giving it a feel of true quality. The exterior frame is all molded plastic, housing a finely stamped steel mesh panel that gives a nod to the larger Corsair design with its intricately scaled down triangular pattern. Just behind this intricate steel mesh is a delicate mesh screen, supported by an internal steel frame to keep things sturdy. The fusion of plastic and steel has given birth to an impressively durable panel that feels well put together. What's more, the finishes of these different materials blend together in harmony, creating a seamless look. The use of plastic enables a finer detailing than what you could achieve with just stamped steel, like this inset frame surrounding the mesh and these curvy wraparound edges. Meanwhile, the critical bits like the thin mesh panel and the fastening clips are all steel. They aren't going to give up on you easily. Moving inwards, the steel frame is rock solid with practically zero flex. That is, until you take off the side fan mount, which does impact the structural integrity. On the whole, the case carries a pretty good fit and finish, with just a few spots where the panel clearance could have been a bit more snug. Moving on to the building experience, despite being a small form factor case, it is quite spacious and easier to build in than some larger cases, largely due to its layout. The Mini-ITX board mounts in the case in an inverted manner with the rear I/O directed towards the bottom. Since there's no I/O cutout at the bottom, there's no need for an I/O shield. The SFX power supply mounts at the top of the case. The case also comes complete with Velcro tie downs for the included 90-degree power extension cable. I was able to route the CPU power and front I/O cables along the front inner edge of the case conveniently. The 24-pin ATX cable is located just below the PSU. I managed to tuck away all the excess cables neatly under the PSU. Although there are multiple cable tie down points, I only had to use 3 zip ties, adding a 4th one after installing the front fans for that extra fan cable. It's a bit tight, but there's sufficient space behind the motherboard tray for smaller fan and RGB cables. If necessary, I could have even fit some of the front panel I/O cables back there. Lastly, this is a single compartment case and the graphics card plugs directly into the motherboard, eliminating the need to fiddle with riser cables. My 335mm power color card fits with room to spare. However, at 55mm wide, there's clearly no room for the rear mounted fans. In fact, Corsair states that the fans fit in the back with 2 slot graphics cards installed. This statement proves true, as a standard 120mm fan barely fits behind a 2-slot graphics card. With the build complete, one of the most intricate steps involved connecting the peripherals, which required delicately tipping the PC on its side to allow the cables to be fed in through the rear opening and plugged in from the bottom of the case. The bend required to fit the DisplayPort cable was tighter than I was comfortable with. It's for this reason I strongly suggest a 90-degree cable for this case. I encountered 0 issues with building in this case, which was a relief. However, depending on your setup, there are some key considerations that warrant your attention. Firstly, I utilized the Noctua NH-L9x65 in this build. Corsair mentions that their maximum CPU cooler height is 90mm. However, I pleasantly found that a 150mm tower cooler could fit in here without any fans on the right. Even with side fans installed, there's still a considerable 129mm of clearance, so your options for air coolers are more diverse than the stats might lead you to believe. If you're embarking on a high-end build with a hotter CPU, the option to install up to a 360mm AIO exists, with ample clearance for larger pump blocks of about 100mm tall. However, remember the extra cables that will accompany this setup. Thankfully, there's room behind the panel for fan and RGB cables, but if you have large proprietary cables and control boxes, it would be wise to devise a good plan to manage potential clutter. Lastly, you have space for power supplies up to 130mm long. However, that would only leave a minimal 30mm of clearance above the motherboard. Here, a shorter power supply is preferable. From my experience, I would definitely recommend a modular unit. Alright, now that we're up and running, it's time to see how much airflow this Airflow case provides to keep our components running cool and efficient. On an open air test bench, the CPU hit a max temperature of 52 degrees Celsius above ambient during an 8-64 CPU stress test. Meanwhile, the GPU reached a delta T of 44 degrees Celsius during a 20-minute port royal loop. In the case with 3 120mm intake fans, the CPU and GPU temperatures each rose by 6 degrees. However, adding a single 140mm side-mounted fan in front of the CPU cooler decreased the CPU temperature by 10 degrees. This brought it 4 degrees under the test bench temperature. Regarding noise, it's completely dependent on the system you build in it. I'm using a very quiet Noctua cooler, the Lian Li Unifans, which were the only white 120mm fans I had on hand are also very quiet. The Power Color Red Devil RX 6750 XT is a fairly quiet card, so this system is quiet. However, the case is completely mesh and doesn't contribute at all to sound dampening. You may have noticed during the build, or might now notice, this case is sitting to my left, not my right as most cases do. This is an inverted case with the right side panel opening up to the internal components. So if you put the case on your right side, like most cases, the noisy components are now facing away from you. This is my only guess as to why Corsair designed it like this. There is no glass to look through and admire your components after all, but if you do want to admire the colorful glow of your RGB internals, you'll have to carve out a spot on your left. Overall, this case is pretty good. The sleek design and meticulous attention to detail really caught my eye, from the triangular mesh pattern that extends throughout the entire case, including the rear magnetic filter, the Corsair yellow trim in selected areas, to the impeccable build quality. This case truly stands out. Now, don't be fooled by the plastic panels. They may seem cheap, but they actually work exceptionally well here. One of the standout features of this case is its compatibility with a 360mm all-in-one liquid cooler, along with the various fan and cooler configurations, offering builders a multitude of options. Despite being a mini ITX case, the range of compatible graphics cards is impressively extensive, unless you're aiming for those high-end Chungus variants. Moreover, the ability to fully open up the case and easily access every nook and cranny made the building experience an absolute breeze. However, I must point out a few drawbacks. Firstly, there seems to be a glaring omission in the form of a manual for this case. Instead, there's just a QR code that just redirects you to the Corsair website. Having a physical or comprehensive digital guide would be super helpful, particularly for novice builders. I myself almost missed some important details like the extra SSD mount holes on the top of the case. Also, the presence of a few screws up there suggests that the entire PSU mounting compartment may be removable, which could be handy for accommodating longer power supplies. It's possible that I missed other hidden features, but well, who knows? Lastly, the only significant issue I encountered with this case is the restrictive opening at the bottom for accessing the I/O. It's quite small and could benefit from being larger, as it can be cumbersome to navigate. Let's wrap this up by talking about the real value proposition. You might recall from the start that I did mention I'll be sending this case back, and that's entirely due to the incorrect description from Newegg. I'm not going to dwell on this, it's just about principles. When I order a product, I expect it to match the description I paid for, no more, definitely no less. Now, the real question, would I shell out $140 for this case knowing it doesn't come with fans? Probably not. When we put this case side by side with others in the same category, it does seem to outshine the Height Revolt 3. The Revolt 3 is a bit cheaper, but also doesn't come with fans, plus provides fewer cooling and GPU options, and sports an odd building layout. If you're on the hunt for a basic ITX case sporting a similar design for under $100, you might want to check out the Meshlicious. Just keep in mind, snagging the PCI Gen 4 riser variant is becoming increasingly challenging and prices have surged. Also in this lineup, you've got the NZXT H1 V2, the revamped version that promises not to set your house on fire. You can find this one going for around $250, and given it comes bundled with a 750 watt SFX power supply and a built-in 140mm AIO, it might just be the best bang for your buck in this form factor, but that's not the one I'd personally choose. If I knew all the facts last week, I'd have picked up the Corsair 2000D RGB Airflow. That extra $50 gets you $90 worth of slim RGB fans and actually saves me around $20 compared to the uni fans I've installed in here. Even if I just threw in a few cheap $10 case fans, we're still not far off from the price of the RGB variant. The Corsair 2000D, along with the others I've mentioned, are rock solid options for anyone looking to build a compact PC without the additional headaches and thermal constraints associated with some of the more boutique SFX cases. I'll drop links to all of these below, but you won't see the Corsair until it's sold by retailers other than Newegg. If you found this review helpful, please give it a thumbs up. Your support means a lot to us. And if you have any questions about the Corsair 2000D or have a suggestion for our next review, drop a comment below. We love hearing from you. If you're new to Elevated Systems, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and click the bell icon to stay up to date on our latest tech reviews. Until next time, keep aiming higher with your builds, and we'll see you in the next one.